Welcome to Risk Engineers Talk Governance. In this final episode of Season 5, due diligence engineers Richard Robinson and Gaye Francis wrap up the theme of difficult conversations engineers need to have, as well as discuss engineering for communities. We hope you enjoy the chat. If you do, please give us a rating and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. If you'd like to keep in touch with R2A's work and events, please head to the website r2a.com.au and sign up to our quarterly newsletter. Thanks for all the wonderful support and feedback this season, and look out for Season 6 as well as an in-person event.
Hi, Richard. Welcome to our final podcast session for Season 5, the wrap-up.
Season 5.
Season 5.
It's hard to believe, Gaye.
It is, but it's very exciting. It's been quite an interesting season this season because we themed it difficult discussions that engineers need to have, and we sort of covered risk management and negligence, our new booklet, the difficult conversations that engineers need to have, catastrophic project blowouts, which is also one of our booklets, but also we've seen that in government projects in particular, and how big projects are not meeting the requirements on time, on budget and to specification. Insurance criteria. One that got a lot of feedback was standards are not the solution. So that was an interesting podcast. Target levels of risk and safety always gets the discussion and the thought leaders happening. Relevant, reasoned, concise, especially around expert witness type cases. How things are done in silos, and then due diligence revisited. So today we thought we'd try and bring all of those topics together in a bit of a mismatch, but bring them all together and talk about in the context of engineering for communities. And the philosophy of engineering is about change and not maintaining the status quo. So that comes down to one of the...
Meaning things improve.
And meaning things improve,
rather
correct.
than decline.
And that it requires engineers and the people in those sort of positions to think about things and not just apply standards like we've talked about previously, to get that improvement in our communities.
Yes, well, you're actually you're actually addressing a somewhat larger subject when you talk about engineering for communities. And what I think you're saying is that in practice, a lot of the core decisions that have been going around the place that have been de-engineered. I mean, one of our frustrations, I guess, is, and that's probably what the previous podcast was about, that due diligence is not just about health and safety.
Correct.
It's about protecting the environment. It's about not having projects blow out when you're trying to get something done. And it is also about making sure that existing plants and processes do the best they can with what you've got, because sometimes you simply aren't going to be able to replace all these things in a hurry. So aging thermal power stations, yeah, we'd like to keep them going until we've sorted out whatever else we're going to do. Australia's getting, well, I don't know, we're getting better at it. We're making it happen because we have to.
And due diligence is one of the processes that you use to demonstrate that that's being done.
Correct. Now, from the point of view of engineering and societies, I mean, one of our frustrations we've noticed, for example, in planning decisions with councils, councils are basically de-engineered. I mean, they've got all these planners making decisions about, and they like target levels of risk and safety because it means you can make a quick decision without having to think things through. Although, as we have demonstrated, we have a current case, even actually demonstrating what the level of risk is somewhat messy, let's put it that way.
Difficult thing to justify.
And uncertain.
Yeah.
And then when you try to work out the quantum of human effort that should be put into a place to deal with something that's messy, that's a little bit scrappy too. So when you're trying to put the two things together, that's why it's hard, and people have to think about these things. Now, if you don't have the engineers around, and certainly in planning decisions, the engineers seem to have basically left the field, so far as I can tell. Same things happen with building surveying. The engineers, for the most part, apart from doing particular studies on bushfires or soil conditions or whatever the aspect is.
They're a single input into the process, aren't they?
A series of single inputs, the way it's going. But the collective overview of what's important to the thing seems to have gone missing. And how many projects do we keep seeing blowing out? It's a little bit frustrating to us to be invited to a large project late in the day and then trying to, as politely as we can, point out that yeah, it would have been better if you thought about this up front.
Yeah, because
And
what you can put in place, the controls that you can put in place and precautions you can put in place when a project is well on its way, after practical completion even, some might say, is very, very limited compared to what could have been done in a safety and design
and you would recall
process.
we have some cabinet and confidence projects that we facilitated their demise, and we're not allowed to talk about in case the tenderers find out
Correct.
and sue the government.
But that was a lot less hurt than if it had gone ahead.
Much less hurt. But let's not go into that. So the whole thing to us has become rather odd, and we don't quite understand why the engineers have, in a sense, vacated the field.
Drop down
And more
the
to the point that the
importance.
senior decision makers haven't grasped that if you're an advanced technological society, pushing the engineers away is going to cause excessive pain for the senior decision makers.
And make those decisions harder and making informed decisions even harder.
But I'm not sure, I don't quite understand how
How
they've
they
done
can
it.
do it.
But it's not as though, we've talked about this before, but in Australia, as long as the sun's shining, of all the places on the planet where there's a lot of sun, you have your Finnish friends.
I do.
And they like nuclear reactors because in winter it's very cold and very dark.
Not much sunshine.
Not much sunshine. Whereas we have lots of it, and it's now cheaper to build
Solar
solar power stations, cheaper, faster, and quicker than nuclear plants. How long did it take the Finns to get the next Olioki stage going?
Last one took up to 15 years because they weren't going to switch it on until they were completely confident that it was safe in inverted commas.
Which we in our society tend to say, we better turn it on because
we've got
the
an
money's
election company
coming up, or something like that.
That's a bit cynical, Richard, but yes, I'm sure people
Not after our experiences on the Geelong Freeway, but perhaps we shouldn't go there either.
So I think, as we're saying, due diligence is one of those processes that we've always said, is used to demonstrate and as a defence against negligence, but it can be applied across the field, not just in health and safety. It can be applied in environment and projects and, SIL reviews, safety integrity level reviews, and a whole lot of things. But one of the other important things I think that goes with the due diligence aspect is that validation and verification. And it's the ability to test and challenge and question, which is not necessarily being done. And that comes down to that questioning of things and thinking things through, but also not just applying the standard as a minimum requirement and not thinking of the context in which the particular problem that needs to be solved in.
Correct. And, not avoiding a problem if you can in the first instance. We were continually astonished at people coming up with ideas, and the solution of not doing it that way at all and doing it a better way, for some reason, just doesn't seem to be considered. We don't get that.
And I think we've used this in our course many, many times. Just because everybody else is doing it that way is not a defence against negligence.
Correct. And the lawyers have been crystal clear about that forever.
Yeah. So, think these things through. What's always been done isn't necessarily the way to go about it, but you've got to be diligent. And we're just talking, and people are absolutely correct that there's no requirements in legislation or in the WHS Act that there's a requirement for engineers to be diligent or demonstrate due diligence. But as an engineer and a business owner, I'd like my engineers to be diligent.
Certainly.
and be able to think these things through from scratch and understand the context in which they're applying it.
A designer who doesn't demonstrate due diligence is just kidding themselves. I don't understand how somebody could even possibly say the designers don't have to demonstrate due diligence. Irrespective of what the legislation says, you would just be setting yourself up for a fall every time.
So I think, engineers are important people in our society, and we're required to have good communities.
Their importance is actually demonstrated because whenever there's a court case, it's always the engineers
that come up and solve it or present the evidence.
Yeah, it's not the town planner. It's the engineers. It's not the building surveyor. It's the engineers. Whenever there's a hard problem, it's the engineers that appear. And I don't quite understand why, if you just look at the court process, if that's what happens, why do all these other parties who can't be a part of the solution per se, why are they making the decisions? That's the bit I don't get.
I think it's also interesting, and another observation that we've probably had is that many of the health and safety people and advisors in organisations don't have that technical expertise.
So they couldn't tell you how to avoid it in the first place because they're not the design party.
So many of the solutions that are put forward by these people and these parties are often in the admin, the procedural sort of areas. So you're down the hierarchy of control before you even start.
And do they attempt in the first instance, which is what they ought to be doing, to consult with those people who could perhaps eliminate the problem? I don't think they do. I think they just put forward the suggestion and, more importantly, actually impose a rule on people without actually testing what the larger solutions ought to be.
So I think there's two things that we've sort of seen, and much of the work that we do could probably be put into two categories. It's those people that want to improve safety in the organisation by demonstrating due diligence
or project management
or project management
or environmental management.
Yes, thank you. And then there's people that also can use and then by doing that process, the due diligence process, you're also demonstrating a governance process that you've been through. Correct. A governance process. And it's sort of hand on heart stuff again, isn't it? You know, we've done everything reasonably we can to protect our community, our workers, the people who our work exposes. What else can we do? Or we've got all reasonable practical controls in place to manage this big project or this environmental issue, whatever it is.
Yep. And that's what that CFA chief said, remember? He said, I've been a volunteer chief for 10 years and I know that I'm going to lose somebody if I keep doing this job.
In a bushfire.
In a bushfire. But what I need to be able to do is put my hand on my heart and say, it wouldn't have mattered if it was my son or daughter fighting the fire. The same thing would have happened and we'd done everything reasonably practical, but we could in the circumstances. And this is Australia and we burn.
Yeah. And so I think, you know, due diligence is one of those processes that can do that. It is a process that requires people to think things through.
Correct.
Look at the context in which your situation is and look at all the controls, not just do the status quo, maintain the status quo. Technology is changing all the time. The controls are changing all the time. And what's reasonable in the circumstances can change year to year. And
Correct.
So it's not something that's done once, put on the shelf and forgotten about. It's something that has to be thought about continuously. So I think that's sort of a wrap to season number 5. We hope you've found it interesting and the difficult discussions that engineers may have or need to have. Rich and I are still looking at doing a in-person event in mid-2025 and especially around this sort of difficult discussions that engineers need to have, because I think it's the interesting part is the different opinions of people and how it works within organisations. So we're looking at setting up a due diligence seminar, as I said, in mid-2025. And if you are interested, sign up to our newsletter to keep informed on how that's coming along and further details as they're released. So thank you again for joining me on for season 5, Richard. And
Pleasure.
we will be back for season 6 later in the year. Thank you.
Thank you.